It's a very exciting time right now in hematological malignancies, but especially in lymphoma. Immune checkpoint inhibitors have shown a lot of activity, particularly in Hodgkin lymphoma, but also in non-Hodgkin lymphoma, in some T-cell lymphomas, and in follicular and large cell lymphoma. So there's a great deal of excitement around combining that with other therapies. There's a lot of excitement about even single agent activity, particularly in Hodgkin lymphoma, where the response rates have been almost 80–90% depending on the trials. So what I'm going to be talking about is how can we learn from other diseases how best to use immune checkpoint inhibitors. And actually, it's very interesting because a lot of efficacy has been seen in solid tumor therapies with immune checkpoints. So my discussion is around how we can learn from those trials and incorporate it into heme malignancies. I think right now 2 drugs have really shown a lot of promise, nivolumab and pembrolizumab, both of them blocking PD-1. There are a number of agents that are coming up that are also very promising, blocking the ligand or the part that binds to the receptor called PD-L1. And then what's also been very interesting is using more than one checkpoint at a time. So using a blocker of PD-1, but also a blocker of a different checkpoint called CTLA-4. And there's a drug called ipilimumab, so nivolumab with ipilimumab has shown a lot of activity in melanoma, for example, and that's being tested now in hematological malignancies. We've been using nivolumab and pembrolizumab as single agents, very high response rate in Hodgkin lymphoma particularly, so that's been very exciting. Now wanting to build on that and utilize those drugs in combinations with other therapies in patients with Hodgkin lymphoma. So we have combinations with brentuximab vedotin, the antibody drug conjugate, and that's being used upfront in elderly patients or in the relapse setting. So I think that's a very exciting approach. There's also a lot of approaches with other molecules, small molecule inhibitors, things like ibrutinib or BTK inhibitors, a lot of activity using PD-1 blockade and BTK inhibition. So I think there really are 2, maybe even 3 challenges. So one of the things is firstly to make sure that as you combine new agents, you don't combine side effects. You're always combining for efficacy, but you want to make sure you don't run into overlapping side effects and toxicities. So that's really what early phase trials really need to be very careful about. I think the other thing that's an important thing is that you don't end up with really very expensive therapies. So some of these drugs are very expensive, so you want to be very careful not to end up with a therapy that is just unreasonably expensive. And then the final thing is in Hodgkin lymphoma, particularly where most therapies are very effective, you want to be careful that you don't dial back on efficacy. So even though chemotherapy may not be something that everyone's excited about, Hodgkin lymphoma, many patients can be cured. So one of the challenges is just to be careful that you don't, in your enthusiasm to use new drugs, end up with less effective therapy overall. So I think exciting times, lots of novel therapies, lots of novel combinations. Immune checkpoints with lots of other treatments are very exciting approaches for the future. Challenges are going to be to compare that against standard treatment and really prove that it's as good or better, and therefore obviously benefits patients.